Hi, my name is Shannon and I'm with Third Eye Nutrition, and welcome back. We are going to be finishing the final series of our coffee talk. And up to this point, we've spoken extensively about how we want to look at coffee, which is this. It can be an incredibly nutritious beverage in terms of it has a very high antioxidant content, but you can't be introducing a lot of toxins along the way. From the very top of the first part of the chain of sourcing all the way down to what you're actually putting in the coffee. Okay, you want to be minimizing the toxic that can be introduced into the coffee. So today we're going to be talking about what you're putting in the coffee. And this is a very personal choice. Obviously, everyone likes their coffee in a different way. And I've kind of categorized into three different parts, which is milk and creamers, sweeteners, and then fats. And the thing is with the creaming is that you can either have a dairy or a non-dairy choice. Obviously, the non-dairy has become a lot more popular in the last 5 to 10 years. If you're going to choose a dairy, it will have more protein, but it's also going to, you want to make sure that you're choosing an organic, full fat, preferably grass-fed product, okay? So whether that's cream, half and half, or milk, you always want to be choosing something that's going to be in those three conditions. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later why. But the next part of it is the non-dairy. And this tends to be the more trendy thing lately of the almond milk, the coconut milk, the hemp, the pea proteins. These are all different milks that are now you're seeing at the store. And the thing about these is that they're all very similar. They have typically a lower protein content. They are all fortified with some type of calcium and vitamin D, so that's a good thing. But the reality is that oftentimes they tend to be very thin in texture. And so what the manufacturer does is that they add a bunch of stabilizers and thickeners to it to make it a product that's comparable to milk. And there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes those thickeners can actually like cause a little bit of GI problems, okay? So if you're getting a little bit crampy and nauseous afterwards, you want to be taking a look at what's actually in those products. And one thing you want to look for are things like guar gum, locust gum. These are all thickeners. The big one lately that's been sort of being targeted is called carrageenan, and you really want to be avoiding that in your products because it's been known to sort of cause a lot of GI havoc, okay? A lot of cramping, nausea, diarrhea. These are things that really you don't want to be putting obviously in your body if that's what it's causing. So that's one thing to think about with non-dairy creamers is just pay attention. So if you have a cup of coffee and you're having this reaction and you might be thinking, oh, maybe it's the acid in the coffee, it actually might be the thickener or the binder that's actually in the creamer itself, okay? The next non-dairy creamer though that I want to talk a little bit about just as a quick reference is if you're using soy products. Anytime you're using soy, please make sure it's organic, okay? Conventional soy in this country is almost always genetically modified. It's going to be sprayed heavily with something called Roundup, and the chemical component in Roundup is glyphosate, which is, as we are finding out, wreaking havoc on the human body, and I will be talking extensively about this. So for now, let's just say if you're going to do soy, please, please, please make sure it's organic, okay, for your body's sake. And I know that if I go to like Starbucks, for instance, and I know they don't serve organic soy there, I just don't get it. I'll choose an almond milk or I'll just choose the milk. It's actually that bad for your body. So choose differently. The final thing that we want to talk a little bit about is like those powders that have like a super long shelf life of like 5 to 10 years. The hazelnut liquid creamers that you get from Coffee Mate, like Nestle puts out a bunch of these products. These are all things you tend to get at gas stations and conventions, excuse me, but you also, people buy these at their home. And the reality is that these products are chock full of pretty much pro-inflammatory products or ingredients, okay? So things like fillers, preservatives, dyes, thickeners, and the worst of them all is sort of these fats, which is what makes them creamy. These fats, if they have a long shelf life, means that those fats over time are going to get oxidized. And particularly if you have cardiac issues in your family or a history of it, you really don't want to be putting any type of oxidized fat. When I say oxidized fat, I mean fat that's gone rancid, okay? These are not good molecules to be putting in your body and they can wreak havoc. They're very pro-inflammatory. So that's one thing to think about is there's so many good products out there now, like hazelnut almond milk creamers and things that just have much more natural products in it and more natural ingredients in it. So that would be sort of my offering to you is find a different substitute that's pretty comparable to that, okay? And with all of these, with the non-dairy creamers, you just want to the general rule of thumb is less processed, the better. If you recognize the ingredients, it's better, okay? So we're gonna move on to the next category, which is sugar. And I think it's safe to say that most people know you're supposed to minimize the sugar intake, because the reality is that you've worked really hard to make this a super antioxidant rich, anti-inflammatory cup of coffee. But if you're putting bunch of sugar in it, that's a very pro-inflammatory thing to do. And if your sugar intake for the total for the day is high, that's just one more like inflammatory thing you're adding. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the breakdown of sugars. If you are going to do a regular table sugar, please make sure it's organic for the exact same reason that soy. It tends to be genetically modified and tends to be sprayed heavily with an herbicide. Okay, you can use honey, and you can use agave nectar. I don't encourage agave nectar, believe it or not. The fructose content of agave nectar is actually quite high, and it's actually higher than high fructose corn syrup. So in my opinion, it's actually one of the biggest marketing scams in food industry, because they've marketed as this healthy food and it's actually really not. Okay, the fructose content is super, super high in it. And the last thing people often use, especially if you're watching Weight or you're diabetic, is these artificial sweeteners. Things like Splenda, aspartame, NutraSweet, the list is very long, depending on what country you live in and how it's marketed in that country. But the bottom line is that most of these products actually probably in essence do a little bit more damage than good, and that if you are diabetic and if you are watching your weight closely and you really don't want to put in these calories in your body, I would say opt for stevia, which is at least a natural product, and as far as the research is saying, it doesn't cause an insulin response like these other products do. So I might make that the subject for next week, just because artificial products are super popular, everyone's using them, and I think you just need to be a little bit more informed about some of the dangers of using Splenda, for instance. So that would be the sort of my take on the sugars. The last thing in this, the craze that's been, sweeping the nation, is the bulletproof coffee. And, that would be adding MCT oil, butter, coconut oil, and those are all fine. It does create this amazing, frothy, beautiful, smooth, satiating product that we all love. And usually, oftentimes, people don't even put sugar on it because it's so satisfying. But the thing about it is you do want to look at the total fat content in your day. And I would say even your carbohydrate content, that if you're dumping that much fat, you do need to offset it calorically by something else. So usually people that are doing this are also lowering their carbohydrate intake. So if you're not doing that, you're probably going to be gaining weight. The thing about MCT oil is that it's a sort of extracted version of coconut oil. So they've sort of pulled out certain fatty acids in it to make it an MCT oil. So if you're going to be doing that, which is pretty much what all MCT oil is, at least the commercial version, make sure it's organic, because it is a derivative of coconut oil, okay? The next thing about MCT and oil, butter and all that stuff is you sometimes, because it's so filling, it does replace your meal sometimes. And so oftentimes people are using this as their breakfast, which is fine, but you want to really make sure, because what people don't realize is that coffee is, it does inhibit the absorption of your vitamins and minerals. And although that's okay, you just want to make sure you're offsetting it somehow, or sort of replenishing that later on down the road. So if you're, not only is it inhibiting the absorption, but then you're also replacing your cup of coffee with, let's say, a really nourishing breakfast like berries and walnuts and yogurt and things like that, then you need to make sure your diet is stellar later down the road. And that means you need to be taking either a supplement, you need to be doing a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, some proteins. You really want to be paying attention to that, okay? So don't just be flippant about your morning coffee if that's actually your breakfast, all right? And the next thing is that because you are dumping all these fat in your body, sometimes your pancreas can't keep up. And so if you're getting any type of nauseous sensations, cramping, diarrhea, if you're seeing oil in your stools, these are all signs that you're not absorbing that fat, okay? And you need to either back off, or you need to go get a digestive enzyme. So something with lipase in it is going to break down those lipoproteins, okay? And then the last thing I'd say is, if you are going to be using butter rather than an MCT oil, which is fine, you really want to make sure it's grass-fed and it's organic. And the reason why is that, and this goes back also to why I want you to do an organic full-fat milk product, is that in the mammalian species, if we are introduced with some type of toxin, your body's job is to keep that toxin away from the brain. So it's either going to be excreted through your kidneys, your liver, or your gut. If it can't do that and it's overwhelmed, it's going to get stored in your fat or your bones. Okay, so if it's going to get stored in your fat, then you have to think that if the cow is eating some type of grain that is got pesticides, herbicides, hormones injected into it, antibiotics, it's got mold in the grains, it's consuming all that. And guess where that's being stored? In the fat. So guess who's eating that? You are. So you really want to make sure that it's organic and it's grass-fed, okay? Not grain-fed, grass-fed, okay? And that's a big reason why that this movement is so popular right now with grass-fed. So now you kind of get a better idea of that. The coffee can be amazing from the beginning to the end, but you got to make sure that you're not introducing toxins along the path, because the reality is if you have a really high antioxidant product, then what you can do is offset any sort of oxidative stress from other elements in your day. So one thing you can't control, let's say, is air pollution. Well, let's use the antioxidants in the coffee to fight that versus offsetting or neutralizing the toxins that you're choosing to put into your coffee. Does that make sense? So hopefully you're going to get like the biggest bang for your cup with this whole series. And if you have any questions or you're confused by anything, please write to me at thirdeyenutrition@gmail.com. And you can always visit me at thirdeyenutrition.com, which I always am giving away some type of goodie. So hopefully it was helpful, and have an amazing weekend, and we will talk next week.